With the new year, while everyone is happy, there's one threat to those of us with lawns and landscapes that we may not necessarily be thinking about, and that is the threat of the dry season. With the start of each year in all Caribbean territories comes the dry season. And it is the singular most impacting threat to our lawns and landscapes, outside of probably something like a bushfire or a meteorite falling on your lawn. I don't know, right? Last year, actually, during the dry season, I would have seen the most decimation of grass I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm actually going to share that with you later on in this video in tip number 3. So in light of all of that, with respect to all of that, I just want to give you some tools and also make sure you know how we can help take you through this period and come out like a star. So let's go. 10 tips to surviving the dry season like a star. Let's go. Alright guys, so we're tackling these tips in reverse order, right? We're going to go from tip number 10 and then end up with the most fantastic tips numbers 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so let's go. Tip number 10. Pay close attention to your grass during this time. You know, a lot of times people get caught out because what they do is that they assume that anything happening to their grass during this time is just because of the dry weather, and that as soon as rain begins falling again, everything is going to be all right. And that is very often a bad mistake. A lot of times people are caught out like this because mole crickets or other pests are actually causing damage to your lawn, and during this time, because it's dry, the grass can't keep up with the damage that is happening. When it was wetter, it could have kept up better, but now it can't. And so it's very important that you keep an eye on your grass at what's happening during this time. It may be the dry weather, yes, but just take a closer look and make sure that it's not something else. So that's tip number 10. Keep a close eye on your grass. Okay, so tip number 9. Tip number 9 is that you consider a drip irrigation system for your plants. You know, the number one reason why plants die is because the owners don't wet them. And during the dry season, obviously, it's even more critical, at least for plants that are outside. No one ever regrets installing an irrigation system, especially drip irrigation systems for their plants, because it really takes the pressure off of you to be consistent in wetting your plants, to remember to wet your plants, and to be wetting your plants properly. And drip irrigation systems are also very efficient. So even if you're looking at the perspective of saving water, it's a very good idea to think about installing a drip irrigation systems. We install lots of drip irrigation systems all the time, and they are fantastic. So that's tip number 9. Do consider installing a drip irrigation system for your plants. Okay, so on the subject of plants, we come to tip number 8. Tip number 8 concerns plants again, and it's about topping up that mulch or putting mulch around your plants. Mulch around your plants helps during this time to keep the soil from evaporating as quickly as it normally would if the surface of the soil were just exposed. Moist mulch significantly reduces the evaporation rate and gives your plants, at least the soil that they're in, makes it a more consistent environment, and it allows you to also to go longer periods without wetting. There's many other benefits to mulch, but as far as the dry season is concerned, this effect of suppressing evaporation is the most important. So tip number 8, mulch your plants. Okay, so tip number 7 is one that you may not expect, and that's about how you cut your grass during this time. You know, during this time is when you see people's behavior or people's attitude. What's the right word? Probably not behavior, attitude, but people's approach to how their grass is maintained really comes out. You know, in my experience, people who consistently keep the maintenance of their grass up, even during the dry season, have the best results all through the year. And that may be for a lot of reasons, because, you know, attention is being paid to the grass all the time. You're more likely to see problems that are occurring. But Tip number 7 that I really want to highlight right now with regard to how you cut your grass at this time is that you cut your grass a little bit higher. And that might be a bit counterintuitive because you're wondering, okay, so how is cutting the grass higher going to be a good idea during the dry season? Well, it's for a few reasons. I think the most important of the reasons is that when you cut the grass higher, it prevents the sun from being able to hit the ground directly. It creates that insulating barrier between the ground and the sun. And so it has the same effect like the mulch around the plants in terms of keeping the moisture in the soil for as long as possible. And during the dry season, you never know. You may get some rain showers in between, and that might just be enough to keep your grass nice and healthy and green if you are utilizing all the ways to really maintain whatever moisture you get in the soil for as long as possible. So that's tip number 7. Keep your grass cut a little bit higher during the dry season. It doesn't mean to cut off cutting all the way. Just keep it a little bit higher and that will definitely help. Tip number 6 is a quickie. Well, it's a quick one, right? When you do cut, leave the cuttings in the grass. Now, it may not be so impacting if during the dry season when you cut, you leave the cuttings in the grass. But if in general, when you cut, you leave the cuttings in the grass, you gradually add to the organic matter that is making up the soil in your grass. Now, I know some of you smart ones out there, some of you informed ones are saying, are you just creating thatch when you do that? And yes, I know if you listen to lawn care channels and so on coming out of the US, you hear a lot about thatch. But I will tell you this, I've never had to detach any lawn here in Trinidad and Tobago in my life, right? Thatch is something kind of different. Thatch mainly comes out of damping off of the grass during the colder or winter months, you know. And so what you have in these temperate countries is that during the cool seasons, the warm season grasses or whatever may turn brown. They may kind of go very, very dormant and die off, and then you get new growth coming up in the spring and in the warmer months of the year. And those old leaves that died off in the cool period are what create the thatch. And that thatch is something that has very different effects. You know, it cuts off air, oxygen, and water and all of this from getting into the soil properly and causes a lot of problems. So that's not a concern of ours. So what I suggest, as much as possible, all during the year, when you cut the grass, leave the cuttings in the grass, especially if you use or your service provider uses a mulching mower that can really cut up those, mince those cuttings fine and have them drop right down in the grass so they're not unsightly. Yeah, this will help all aspects of your lawn in the long run. So number 6, leave the cuttings in your grass. It was supposed to be quick, but it wasn't that quick, right? Okay, so while Elise is getting rid of weeds, we're looking at tip number 5. And tip number 5 is a don't. It's a don't as opposed to a do, right? And it comes out of a question I get all the time, and that is, should I fertilize my grass in the dry season? And the reason why people want to fertilize their grass in the dry season is because they're trying to get it back green, right? But the problem with the grass during the dry season is not that it's lacking nutrients, it's that it's lacking water. So trying to fertilize your grass during this time may actually be doing more bad than good, right? For several reasons. Number 1, the grass is usually dormant, and because it's dormant, it cannot actually utilize the fertilizer that you're putting on it. So you're probably wasting your money. And the second part of it is that the fertilizer may actually contribute to a reverse osmosis gradient in the soil, actually pulling water out of your grass instead of allowing water and moisture to be coming in. So number 5, don't fertilize your grass during the dry season. Oh, I almost forgot. The only time I would recommend you fertilize your grass during the dry season is if you have and are using an irrigation system. If you're using an irrigation system, by all means, you can fertilize your grass as normal and have the full benefit of fertilizer in your grass. But just to reiterate, tip number 5, don't fertilize your grass in the dry season. Okay, so on the topic of irrigation systems, we come to tip number 4. And tip number 4 is, if you can use your irrigation system during the dry season, by all means, utilize your irrigation system. However, we have to be conscious about the time that you're in during this time. If it's really dry, then I suggest that if you're using your irrigation system, to use it sparingly. You know, using your irrigation system sparingly, or as sparingly as possible, is actually most beneficial to the grass. Because if you have your grass getting watered all the time, it encourages, or shall I say, it discourages the grass from sending roots deeper. Whereas if you irrigate less frequently, it encourages the grass to send the roots deeper, and it creates more resilient grass. And so if you're using your irrigation system, I recommend you use that sparingly as possible. And if things are pretty bad, you can bring your irrigation down to as little as once a week, I think. What you would do is that you water on one day, but on that one day you could probably water the grass probably at least twice. That way you get more water into the soil on that day, but you don't facilitate runoff and so on by having it run for a long period of time at one time. Right? So tip number 4, if you have an irrigation system and you're not breaking the law, by all means use it, but use it as sparingly as possible. Okay guys, so now we come to the top 3 tips, right? And tip number 3 is treat preemptively for mole crickets and other pests at this time. And this is extremely important. Remember, I would have told you that I was going to come back to what I experienced last year, which was the greatest loss of grass I've ever seen, that was like in a bushfire. Yeah, that happened last year, and it happened due to a pest called chinch bugs. Presentation College Shogunas would have called me to look at to try to figure out what was decimating their grass. They thought it was the dry season. They thought it was just at the normal drying of the grass. It's savanna grass, normal drying of the grass due to the dry weather, but it was not that. It was the action of chinch bugs. Now, I have never before seen chinch bugs in Trinidad and Tobago. I would have read about them, I would have heard about them, but I never saw them. And let me tell you, compared to mole crickets, compared to chinch bugs, mole crickets are like primary school boys in short pants. Chinch bugs are the real deal. They are no joke. In one dry season, they were able to decimate over 1.5 acres of grass on Presentation College Shogunas ground. And that cost them almost $100,000 to fix. It's serious. It is serious. And so treating preemptively for these kind of things, if you know that you have a history of mole crickets or chinch bugs, or that these pests are active in your area, it makes a lot of sense and will save you a lot of heartache potentially, and time and money, if you treat preemptively for them. And we'll be happy to come and conduct these treatments for you, and do them properly. And once we formulate, for mole crickets, we'll formulate for the chinch bugs one time, and doing so while being as responsible as possible and preserving the other beneficial organisms in the grass and in the soil. So tip number 3, treat preemptively for chinch bugs and other pests. Alright, so the tips continue, and we're on to tip number 2. Second to last, we're almost there. The light is fading. I'm shooting in the dark. But we're depending on how good Canon is, right, at making cameras. So here we go. Tip number 2, apply seed killer. Now you tell me that, you would have heard me tell you this all the time, that the most important thing you can do for your lawn at any time of the year, not just the dry season, is to make sure and on schedule apply seed killer. Because seed killer helps you to avoid problems. You know what does the saying go? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yes. In this case, that is exactly right. An ounce of seed killer is worth a pound of herbicide. And all that effort and all that time. If you are on schedule with your seed killer treatments, chances are you would have very little else to do unless you have some particular problems. Things like nut grass and certain things like that that don't necessarily propagate from seed. But tip number 2, and very important, very close with tip number 1 in terms of importance, treat your grass with a seed killer during this time. Alright guys, so we're here at the grand finale of these 10 tips. I've been very glad to share them with you. Let's go tip number 1. Tip number 1.
Tip number 10 you mean?
No, I mean tip number 1. Tip
number 2.
Shh. No, it's fine. Tip number 1. Treat the weeds in your grass now. Treat the weeds in your grass now. The reason why I put tip number 1 above tip number 2 is because tip number 1 has more urgency. You see, because the dry season has not fully set in as yet. There's still moisture in the ground. We're still potentially going to be getting rain. The weeds in your lawn, if your lawn has weeds, are still active. And while they are active, they are most vulnerable to being treated with the herbicides, the selective herbicides and so on that kill the weeds and preserve your grass. When the weather dries out, the weeds become less active. Their metabolism becomes, slows down. And they are less vulnerable to treatments, right? Treatments actually may not affect them, or it may not affect them as deeply as they could if they were treated at a better time. And the second reason to treat those weeds now is because when the season starts to dry out and those weeds sense that, a lot of them go to seed and they put that seed down in your grass. And so while it is now, you may have one weed to deal with, later on you may have 100 from that one weed. And so to avoid all that, again, ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure, or a stitch in time saving 9, or I'm sure there's a third one. I'm sure there's a third one. Anyway, yeah. Treat those weeds now. Call us. We are very happy. This is the core of what we do. The core of what we do is treating weeds and getting weeds out of grass. You know, and we'll be very happy to come and see what's going on with you. Remember, our assessments are free. So you can feel free to call and then we'll work out how things go, what program we can put you on, and how we can schedule those seed killer treatments and so on, so we don't have to do these fights in the future. Alright, so I feel like I'm out of breath right now, right? It's been a whirlwind 10 tips. I'm trying to keep the video as short as possible while giving as much information as possible. But this is why Green Dynamics is here, and this is why we created our lawn rescue program to help homeowners like you who have lawns, who have landscapes, who value your aesthetics, but who may have busy lives or may not be that ready to invest in all the knowledge and all the work. I don't want to call it work because it's not all that much work, you know what I mean? But all the effort that's involved in keeping your lawn and your plants and so on at a high standard. So I really hope these 10 tips help. If you apply them, they definitely will help. And we are here to support you through all of this, to apply the treatments, to make the assessments, to recommend actions, and so on as you go forward, and as you continue to have a bright and prosperous new year. So I wish all God's blessings upon all of you and all your families, and until the next one, stay green, my friends.